Lincoln for President. An exciting talk. Give me a show of hands if this first slide summarizes your opinion of the current Donald Hillary, but probably not Bernie, popularity contest. Has that got it for you?
I think that means...
Now, keep your hands up if the emotional state of the little boy in the next slide summarizes your opinion of, I wish Lincoln were running. Nose against the candy store window. Okay?
Is it possible to have those bigger or sharper? I cannot make out good.
I don't know how to do that. I'm sorry. Sorry. We'll make the best we can of it. Well, it looks like, with all those hands up, it looks like I'm preaching to the choir. Okay? Now, Abraham Lincoln, as a candidate for president, is not quite the same one that was born in 1809, because he'd be 207, and you might say he's past his prime. So, we're going to change the rules. Well, it's my imaginative construct, so I get to make up the rules, right? So, we're going to put him at 51, which was the age he was when he first ran. So, as is the case this year, neither candidate is running for re-election. Both are looking for the job for the first time.
Right.
Okay? So you can't say that whoever he's running against is going to get defeated by Lincoln because he's already president. Sorry, we changed the rules that way. They're both at a level playing field. So, Lincoln for president. I'm going to go through this little imaginative romp, and I'd like you to join me for two reasons. First of all, I think it will shed some light on the manner in which we as a people select our political leaders. And secondly, because it has to do with Abraham Lincoln. And I want you to come to the same conclusion that I came to about 6 years ago when I finished writing my calendar-based book, Lincoln 365. Namely, Lincoln isn't nearly as dead as we might imagine. Now, before we get into it, who's got a birthday today?
There's somebody.
Somebody got a birthday?
He's not here right now.
Well, if they're not here right now, no cigar. Who had a birthday yesterday? Tomorrow.
Oh, wedding anniversary today.
Well, no, we're just doing birthdays. Because then I'd have to give it to two people. Who's got a birthday the day after tomorrow? Or the day before yesterday?
We don't know.
Everybody knows when your birthday is. You don't remember your own birthday?
I do.
Good, that's what we're talking about. Who had a birthday in June? What date?
3.
3rd of June.
30th.
Too far away. You get the CD. Written was to Abe Lincoln, 68 minutes. Enjoy. Show it to me afterwards at my table. I'll sign it for you if you'd like. Anyway, everybody feel like you've been given something because she's been given something. It's my way of saying thank you for coming. So, Lincoln for president. I'm going to cover 3 aspects. Lincoln's opponent, Lincoln's destruction, and Lincoln's maybe victory. With a little tag on at the end as to which way are you guys going to vote? Because it is not a slam dunk that you will vote for Lincoln. Get it? Because you may not. So, his opponent. Well, the first thing we've got to do with his opponent, by the way, I hope these slides appear in the order in which they do up here, because this is a different talk. I couldn't get the slides for today's talk to show up on that computer. Good thing I got here an hour and a half late early. Anyway, before we talk about his opponent, let's talk about his opponent's role model. And it may be somebody you've already heard of, although it's kind of tawdry. It's President Francis Underwood, from the Netflix miniseries House of Cards. Anybody know Francis Underwood? Frank Underwood? Anybody watch the miniseries?
Yeah.
Yeah, a couple of you. Okay. So, we'll do a quick rundown because some of you don't know who Frank Underwood is, or F.U., as he's known. Francis Underwood, F.U. I'll give you a couple of his salient quotes. Democracy is overrated. Choosing money over power is a mistake many people make. And finally, don't let a little dirt get in your way. Now, Frank Underwood knows how to move fast, and he is gifted with laser beam focus, so you want to be careful if you are within range, because that is Frank Underwood.
Oh, no. How cute.
So who's his opponent? Well, his opponent, the one that looks up to Frank, is that stalwart Demopublican, that fearless Republican, that unsung hero of the American body politic, your friend and mine, Senator Phineas T. Windbag. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. He's a politician, he's a crook. Well, not quite so fast. Because there's whole chunks of the good senator that are genuinely patriotic. But I will give you this. He does have a hazardous work environment. Because he lives and moves and has his being in a world awash in money. So you're not surprised to hear the following scenario. Some lobbyist oils his way up to the good senator and whispers the following in his ear. PT, he's PT to his friends, and he's got lots of friends. PT, I'm sending you down to the Bahamas for 2 weeks of golf. My way of thanking you for letting me shepherd my bill through the Senate. And when you get back, those boring details, my friends and I'll have them all ready for your approval. Have a nice trip. And he'll get that approval. Because he learned a long time ago in politics, once bought, stay bought. It's his way of staying true to his friends, you know, through thick and thin. But he's going to go beyond that because he just knows that you and I just love the sound of his own voice every bit as much as he does. So he's going to have a whole string of brand new 30-second sound bites just waiting to clog up our emotional arteries because he never met a TV news crew he wasn't seduced by. Or, to put it in terms of his role model, F.U., a politician would drown a litter of kittens for 5 minutes of prime time. Heck, PT had drowned a litter of kittens for 45 seconds on the 10 o'clock news. So, PT is his party's choice for president. And the very first thing he's going to do, once he gets that nod from his party, is go out and hire himself a whole pack of, well, let's call them research assistants, shall we? Their job, of course, is to make sure that you and I do the right thing on election day. And they're going to do that by seeing to it that everybody else who wants to run for president is dealt with efficiently. So, Lincoln is going to be one of those. So, some of these little fellas are going to be dedicated to the Lincoln file. By the way, these guys are going to be hard working, dedicated, laser beam focused, and forward thinking. Here's the Lincoln team. FU Mark 1, Mark II, and Mark III. They're going to take care of Lincoln. Now, I can imagine these three getting 2 pictures and a cartoon ready for a strategy session so they can get their boss's approval. They can go ahead with this. And my guess is that the Lincoln component of that strategy session wouldn't take 10 minutes tops. Why? Because Lincoln makes it so easy to deal with him, as you're going to see. So FU Mark I points out the fact that Lincoln was country. Some of you know that he was country. And, well, you'd be a little lost in the sophistication of Washington, D.C. But the way we get that across isn't by saying he's going to be drowned in all that sophistication. We just put it this other way. How do you like the caption? Are there pocket combs in the White House? By the way, that picture, no Photoshop. That is the real deal. Abe Lincoln had a way of having his hair go all kinds of a which way. You check a $5 bill the next time you pull out your purse or your wallet. You see what I mean. Hair's every kind of a which way. FU Mark II, he's a little more serious. He's going to point out to everybody at that meeting that Lincoln suffered from chronic clinical depression, which is true. And that 20 years earlier, he was on the business end of a suicide watch, which is true. And the picture that FU Mark II got is from 20 years before. And the picture has not been doctored up. So far, everything's true, right? The only place where the truth has been massaged a little bit is in the caption. And it's only 3 words. What do you think? Isn't that cute? Another psychotic episode? Question mark. Looks like he's having one, doesn't it? That is the picture of depression. And the biggest laugh of the entire strategy meeting is going to happen here. Because FU Mark II is going to point out that, in point of fact, Lincoln never had a psychotic episode. So talking about another one, well, it implies that there were a few. But who's counting when you're having fun, right? FU Mark III, and he's just going to do the mopping up. He's going to take a couple of qualifications that you and I would look to in any presidential candidate and blow them out of the water. For starters, his paper-thin resume. His military experience was almost non-existent. True, he was involved in an Indian skirmish 30 years earlier, but the thing only lasted a couple of weeks. He never heard a shot fired in anger. We're going to give this guy the nuclear codes? I don't think so. No executive experience. He's a lawyer. 2-man law firm. No executive experience. He went from no executive to chief executive in one large step. Yeah, right. And finally, no foreign policy experience. By the way, this is all true, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
He didn't speak any foreign languages, and he never traveled outside the United States in his entire lifetime. But then, you don't expect much foreign policy experience from a hayseed lawyer from Podunk, USA, a million miles from anything international. So, FU Mark III is going to summarize all that with that quote that you've heard repeated over and over again the last couple of presidential election cycles, ready on day one. How do you like the punctuation? He ain't ready. By the way, even his most firm supporters would laugh at these attacks. Because they're kind of funny, aren't they?
Yeah.
So, we're done. FU marks 1, 2, and 3 have dealt effectively with the Lincoln candidacy, leaving it to bleach in the sun. The end. Well, actually, maybe not the end. Some of you may be thinking, the Lincoln we've been talking about is curiously passive, isn't he? This prodigious doer of deeds has done nothing. This man gifted with the wondrous, wizardly workings of words has said nothing. He's written nothing. But that's not the Lincoln his law partner knew. By the way, that quote puts him toe-to-toe with Phineas T. Windbag, doesn't it? Ambition is a little engine inside him that knows no rest. So, we're going to go back to look at Abraham Lincoln the way he was, but it's not the Lincoln you know. Of necessity, the Lincoln you know is the Lincoln after the end. That includes the presidency. I took the presidency out, didn't I? We got to go back to the Lincoln before the beginning. And I'm talking way before the beginning. I'm talking about the Lincoln that all those little FU wannabes wouldn't have gotten to because it's too far back. I'm talking about Lincoln as a teenager. Because, as Sigmund Freud says, the child is the father of the man. So, what about that Lincoln? What's he like? What was he like before he became a politician? Although, you could say, there wasn't a time before he was a politician, but we won't go into that. That's what he was. As a teenager, that's what he was. Can you imagine this word and this word fitting in the same sentence about the same person? Rebellious and popular?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
If you're when I was a teenager, I was rebellious, but I wasn't popular. But Lincoln, let's go through some of the ways Lincoln was rebellious. He didn't hunt. He didn't fish. He didn't use guns. A lot of his contemporaries, his immediate contemporaries, in the early 19th century frontier did those things, right? He didn't smoke tobacco. He didn't chew tobacco. He didn't swear. He didn't fight. He didn't drink. He said whiskey made him feel, quote, flabby and undone. So he just never touched it. He didn't like feeling that way. So he just never drank. But he also didn't join the temperance movement. And here, P.T. should be paying attention as to why. Why didn't he join the temperance movement? And I think if we scratched a little bit under Lincoln's motivations, he probably would have said something about the Lord's Prayer. Because in the Lord's Prayer, we ask for forgiveness for just one sin. What sin is that? Forgive us our trespassing. Trespassing. It was important enough for Jesus Christ to single that out. It's the only sin mentioned. And I think Lincoln would have said, that's what they're doing with their incessant kind of evangelization. You shouldn't drink. You shouldn't drink. Not only that, Lincoln probably would have said, it doesn't pay. You don't get what you're after anyway, so why do it? People just clam up, don't they? Somebody saying you shouldn't drink isn't going to keep the person from drinking. P.T. should be paying attention, but he probably isn't. And the reason he isn't, in my opinion, is because P.T. probably trespasses all the time, and he doesn't even realize he's doing it. So that gets back to Lincoln's rebellion. He didn't choose either of his father's two professions, farming, carpentry, preferring instead to make his mark on the world in which he lived by navigating successfully the labyrinth of his own mind. He didn't share his contemporaries' rank and insistent prejudice against African Americans or Native Americans, treating both groups in a kindly fashion. All the more impressive because his grandfather, would you believe, named Abraham Lincoln, had been killed by an Indian. His contemporaries derided the need for education. He valued it highly. They looked to Andrew Jackson and the Democrats for their political ideal. Lincoln looked to Henry Clay and the Whigs. They were members of Christian denominations. Lincoln was never baptized and never was a member of any Christian denomination, ever. I'm going to stop there because you guys are going to want to get out in time for dinner, right? Sooner or later. I could keep going until the cows come home, but we'll stop there. So, what about this other part? Popular. Why didn't that drive everybody nuts? Why didn't they just shun him? Why instead were they drawn to him as morning glories open to the sun in the morning? Why is that? Because he was friendly, he was affable, he had a great sense of humor, great storyteller. If we were to list all the world-class wits that America has produced on one hand, you know, Ben Franklin and Mark Twain, and Will Rogers, and whoever you'd want to name, Lincoln's going to take up most of the fingers. He was helpful. He could read and write. He taught himself to read and write. You probably know that. And that meant that whenever any relative or friend got a letter. This is early 19th century. This is not 21st century, you know, junk mail time. There was no junk mail. You got a letter, you had to deal with it. And you couldn't say, oh, well, I don't have to deal with it because I can't read or write. No, 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 no. So they'd call young Abe to come in. He'd read the letter. And then he'd say, well, what do you want to say in reply? Do you want to say it this way, or do you think maybe there's a better way we can fix it up to say it? And that was Lincoln's School of English Composition. That's where he learned how to write, by writing letters for family and friends. At one point, Lincoln decided to run for political office. Age 23. Illinois State Legislature. In point of fact, he lost. At first bid for election, he lost. Next time around, 2 years later, he won. But the first time he lost. This is what he said in a speech running at age 23. I have no ambition so great as that of being highly esteemed of my fellow men by rendering myself worthy of that esteem. Now, if you look at the simple landscape of Lincoln's psyche, there's no way you're going to win the esteem by pulling a fast one. P.T. should be paying attention. And if he had, it probably wouldn't do any good, would it? Even if P.T. said, oh, well, this is something that's really important, he could beat me on this one. He's not going to, you know, the leopards don't change their stripes. God help him. By the way, he never thereafter repudiated that sentiment of earning the esteem of his fellow men by rendering himself worthy of that esteem. Something about that election, though, he did lose, but this is kind of like grassroots exit poll. Of the 300 people in his little village of New Salem, 277 voted for Lincoln. Translation: to know Lincoln is to trust Lincoln. Wow. Words have power. Now I see that there are a whole lot of slides there that I'm going to have to fill in. So I'm going to have to go to my book. I've annotated my book here with these little tabs. I already did the research, and I did the research on the research. So I'm going to do this first one here. Oh yes, he really was depressed. One of Lincoln's colleagues in the Illinois legislature wrote, "We followed his lead, but he followed nobody's lead. It may almost be said that he did our thinking for us. He inspired respect, although he was careless and negligent. He was poverty itself, but independent. He sought company and indulged in fun without stint. Still, when by himself, he told me that he was so overcome by mental depression that he never dared carry a pocket knife in his pocket." That get you where you're at?
Yeah.
By the way, Lincoln is a poster child for mental illness. but he did have a drug of choice. He did have a drug of choice. And the drug that he used to counter the depression, by the way, the depression was there all the time. I get depressed sometimes, but not all the time. Some mornings I bounce out of bed and I say, "Good morning, Lord," and I'm ready to go. Other days I slink out of bed and say, "Good Lord, morning," and I'm ready to stop. Well, Lincoln wasn't like that. It didn't oscillate back and forth between good days and bad days. Every day was black. Every day was black. He had to bring the light in. He had to bring the light in. And that developed a kind of psychic musculature that never left him. And as I say, his drug of choice was humor. Same drug you can use. And you can't OD on it, can you? There's no such thing as what's the word? Overdose. Sorry, it's been a long day. Overdosing. The beautiful, universal, evergreen of life is what he called it. By the way, there's one other thing that Lincoln taught himself to do besides reading and writing. And it was done as a young man. In fact, people would see him doing this when he would be taking a break from farm work. He'd be studying Euclidean geometry. What? And the logical principles behind it. You know, 180 degrees in a triangle, all that kind of stuff. 360 degrees in a circle. And I used to think that a circle is two triangles, but I don't think that's quite correct. When I was doing geometry, I don't know how that works. Anyway, he had a mind like a steel trap. He also had a remarkable ability to express himself with great clarity. How do you like this one? At one point he said, "How many legs does a dog have if you count the tail a leg?" 4. Counting the tail a leg doesn't make it a leg. By the way, anybody out there who wants to make some tail into some kind of a leg and do that within range of this steel trap mind would want to do it with great care because of what Lincoln would do afterwards. And it would not be to belittle the person who did that, but to demolish the logic behind it and probably leave everybody in the audience in a state of uproarious laughter. We'll get to that. I haven't got the slide for this one either. This is Lincoln as a lawyer. In the late 1850s, Lincoln was involved in a high-profile case arguing for a steamship company against a railroad company. The issue had to do with low-lying trestles across a river. In his summation to the jury, the lawyer for the railroad argued brilliantly as to why the burgeoning economic prosperity of the entire region demanded free and unfettered access to bridges across rivers. His summary took over an hour. Lincoln's summary was one sentence. What this jury has to decide is whether one group has more right to cross a river than another group has to go up and down the same river. He won the case. I'm sorry I don't have this slide. In 1846, he decided to run for the House of Representatives. And his opponent was a fire and brimstone preacher, Democrat, by the name of Peter Cartwright. The story goes that during the course of the campaign, Lincoln attended one of Cartwright's services. And during the service, preacher Cartwright asked that all who desired to give their lives to God and go to heaven should stand. And of course, everybody stood up, except Lincoln. He then asked those who did not wish to go to hell to stand. Of course, everyone stood up, except Lincoln. Cartwright, of course, was sensitive to the fact that Lincoln was in the congregation. He then pointedly asked Lincoln if he didn't stand in answer to either question, where exactly did he intend to go? Lincoln replied, "I came here as a respectful listener. I did not know I was to be called upon by Brother Cartwright. I believe in treating religious matters with due solemnity. I admit that the questions propounded by Brother Cartwright are of great importance. I did not feel called upon to answer as the rest did. Brother Cartwright asked me directly where I am going. I desire to reply with equal directness. I'm going to Congress." It was a sleeper. What do you think of this kind of
I need to walk that. Yeah, you got that. That was perfect stuff.
And at one point, during the Lincoln-Douglas debates, you've heard of those, 2 years earlier, before his run for the presidency, Senator Douglas came out with some argument or other, and Lincoln replied that, quote, "it was a fantastic and specious arrangement of words by which a man sets out to prove a horse chestnut to be a chestnut horse." Now, I want to suggest to you that everybody at that debate did what you just did, which was laugh. History does not record what Stephen Douglas said after the laughter died down. But I can imagine it went something along these lines.
Sorry, Joyce, I had to run upstairs.
Well, anyway, right? That is the verbal equivalent of a sidestepping pregnant duck. By the way, you probably know that a real politician always gets the last word. Douglas didn't that time, did he? Because Lincoln did. There was no comeback. That is the ultimate debate zinger. He wasn't just a smart aleck. Lincoln said things that were substantial. He wasn't just clever. I think maybe Phineas T. Windbag is just clever. But I don't know that he could come up with anything like this. That That is the issue that will continue in this country when these poor tongues of Judge Douglas and myself shall be silent. It is the eternal struggle between these two principles, right and wrong, throughout the world. They are the two principles that have stood face to face from the beginning of time and will ever continue to struggle. The one is the divine right of kings, and the other, the common right of humanity. Now, let me give you a couple of reasons, because you're thinking, well, I vote for Lincoln. Let me give you a couple of reasons why you wouldn't. You may be a capitalist and take unkindly to this characterization. These capitalists generally act harmoniously and in concert to fleece the people. And, Mr. Chairman, this is exclusively the work of politicians, a set of men who have interests aside from the interests of the people, and who, to say the most of them, are taken as a mass, at least one long step removed from honest men. I say this with the greater freedom because, being a politician myself, no one can regard it as personal. You may not take kindly to it if you're a politician. You may also not take kindly to this, although you might. I don't like that man. I must get to know him better.
That's profound.
Or this, which very few people would agree with. In his day, in our day. I got it memorized, I don't need the book. Passion has helped us, but can do so no more. In future, passion will be our enemy. Reason, cold, hard, unimpassioned reason, must forever furnish all our substance for our mutual support and defense.
That is amazing.
Everybody's passionate. You're not going to get anything done if you're not passionate. Everybody knows that. Of course Lincoln's wrong. No, he's just all by himself. Never repudiated that. I'd like to give you another reason why you might vote against him. Who are those guys in the back?
Heaven only knows.
ISIS. Not the guys in the front. I think if Lincoln were alive today, I just put this to you and I'm only guessing, but I do know my subject very well. My guess is that he would look at this reality, which has no roots in the 19th century whatsoever. This is a 21st century reality. And say, the reason why people would be there in the back, by the way, their faces aren't visible. That's what you do if you're a coward. The reason why they're there is their lives before ISIS was so utterly full of despair. Any economic prospects? I don't think so. I spent 13 years teaching in a prison, and I know what it's like. Those guys have made a decision. Live fast, die young. I saw them in my class in prison every day, all day, every day. Live fast, die young. What Lincoln would do to defeat ISIS is not what everybody else does, which is just kill them, but deprive them of their appeal by giving them a sense of hope. And if I followed that up with some kind of policy statement, which sounds like we're giving them money or we're giving them some kind of favorable treatment when they're executing people and so on, you just might say, oh, draw the line there. I think the evidence is there aplenty that Lincoln would come out with some kind of policy like that. And that's the only thing I'm going to say about any current political boiling point issue and what Lincoln would say about it. The other question is, if he were running, would you guys vote for him after what I said?
Yes,
You need to know more.
I would.
You didn't say enough.
I've only been talking for 50 minutes.
50 minutes?
50 minutes, yeah.
How much?
What?
Not much.
Not much. You're right. You're right. You've been very good. You've been sitting there like little lambs, listening carefully, paying attention. And now it's time for you to talk. You spent a lifetime with Lincoln in and out of your life. He's like a force of nature, isn't he? Carved as he is from the granite of the great American heartland, this man. What have you to say?
Honestly,
Any comments? Any questions? Yeah.
it's something like you said, and you have the hand up your mouth. What did you say he injected himself with?
Humor.
Oh, okay, I didn't hear the
The
word.
drug of choice.
Okay.
Sorry. Any other questions or comments?
I think that's so important. Some of the nuances of what you said we're going to be reading for a long time.
Well, I hope that's not a bad thing.
Yeah, that is a wonderful thing because I know that I have much to learn. But I love Lincoln, and I do think that he had an insight that none of us had in his time.
He did.
He had the
I'm not
honesty
saying,
to say what he thought, and that his feelings were based on the common good. I want to be respected by people, and I want that to be because I've done things to earn their respect. And what more could you want from somebody who you want to lead you? Somebody who has that mindset, who has the common good as his driving force.
Not everybody, of course, agreed.
okay, I'm at it.
But, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I agree with what she said, but he didn't have the media. And when you throw in the media, you change the whole picture. And what you think you're talking about, you're no longer talking about. You're talking about people who are interviewing, who are asking questions, who are setting people up to make them look foolish. So things are so much more complicated now that it's just hard to believe.
No comparison.
I appreciate Lincoln, but he didn't have to deal with.
Oh, well, he did. But it was a different...
Yeah, but it was from here to there. It wasn't all over the country.
At one point, since the talk is over, we'll talk a little bit about the war, because there was a civil war that started like a couple of days after he got the job, and then
And he
ended
hated
a
it.
couple of days before he was assassinated. 630,000 people died in the space of 49 months. That's 2% of the national population. If that number were jacked up to today's population, it would be about 7 million people
Absolutely.
in 49 months. You would know somebody who was dead. And if you didn't, you knew somebody whose arm had been blown off, or whatever. You probably knew a lot of people who were
And it might
dead.
have been your brother.
Yeah, yeah. there was a cartoon that appeared, I think, in the New York Tribune, which was the paper, and it showed a scrawny-looking figure with hair going every kind of a which way, kind of like Woody Woodpecker, supposed to represent Abe Lincoln, and he's looking kind of ignorant, and a very sad-looking, matronly, motherly woman who says, "Where are my 500,000 sons?" And the Lincoln figure says, well, that reminds me of a story. Because he used to say that a lot. A lot of things reminded him of a story. He had media to deal with, didn't he?
Did he
Not the
have-
same media that we had, but it was devastating all the same.
There was no answer. Not to that woman.
Any other comments, questions? If you have any more questions, I'll be at my table signing books, and if you'd like me to, I'll sign your CD there, if you'd like. Well, actually, we do have a little bit more time.
Well, we can go 5 minutes early.
Thank you so much.
Very welcome, my pleasure. Thank you, thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful story.
Too bad we don't have politicians like that now.
Very well.
She doesn't. No. We would just like to know who's. Yeah, I know. I know. So I wonder, I hadn't heard anything.
Nobody come down? Let me see, look at her, look at your
These are actually,
she's so prominent. She would be
yeah, I've got that book if you want to.
All I can think of is that, you know,
And she had her on last night. And,
What you think, Frank? Like it? Don't ask you.
yes, yes.
All right.
I want
Oh, did you know?